Have you ever watched someone dig their own grave with a silver spoon? There is a specific, suffocating silence that falls over a boardroom when a man realizes his lie will cost him absolutely everything. I am one of the unseen workers who keeps the corporate machine running. This is what happens when those at the very top get too comfortable taking our credit. The trap we set in this room is one you will want to take notes on. Hello and welcome back to Boss Revenge Stories. We are truly grateful for your continued support of our channel. Unfortunately, YouTube has recently demonetized our channel, leaving us without the operating budget to keep bringing you these narratives. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us by joining our Patreon, where you can listen to even better, highly exclusive true stories voiced by a full cast of emotional actors that we simply cannot share publicly on YouTube. You can join by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link down in the description or the pinned comment. Let us dive straight into today's story, a personal account from me, Nora Parker. I am 32 years old, working as the lead site strategist at the commercial real estate firm Apex Horizon Builders. To the outside world, that title sounds prestigious, conjuring images of sleek glass high-rises and powerful boardroom negotiations. But in reality, it means I am the human shield who absorbs the impact whenever executive incompetence collides with structural reality. The Apex office was exactly what you would expect from a mid-tier firm trying too hard to look top-tier. Everything was painted in sterile shades of slate and frost. The air conditioning was permanently set to a bone-chilling temperature, and the smell of burnt espresso beans and simmering anxiety clung to the cheap synthetic upholstery of my chair. My back ached from sitting for 10 hours straight, and the stale taste of my third cup of vending machine coffee lingered bitterly on my tongue. It was exactly 5 o'clock on a Friday evening. Outside my 7th-floor window, the city was coming alive. I could see the blurry taillights of commuters rushing home to their families, their dogs, and their Friday night dinner reservations. Inside, the oppressive hum of the overhead fluorescent lights buzzed like a swarm of angry hornets inside my skull. That was the exact moment my boss, Marcus Vance, decided to stroll into my cubicle and drop a metaphorical hand grenade onto my desk. Marcus was a Teflon-coated executive who survived entirely on aggressive networking, expensive hair gel, and the stolen labor of people exactly like me. He slid a silver flash drive onto my desk alongside a printed-out 400-page risk assessment for the Vanguard project. The Vanguard project was the undisputed crown jewel of our fiscal year. It was a massive multi-million-dollar waterfront redevelopment in Seattle that was supposed to put Apex Horizon Builders on the map. The entire future of our firm hinged entirely on the pitch scheduled for 8 o'clock Monday morning to our primary financial backer. Marcus leaned casually against my desk, already wearing a pristine white golf shirt and a pair of tailored khakis that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He slung a custom leather golf bag over his shoulder. "I need this bulletproof by the time I get back, Nora," he said, flashing a brilliant, utterly empty smile that never quite reached his cold eyes. "I am heading out for a weekend golf retreat in Aspen with some of the junior partners. You always know how to spin the numbers to make us look good. Have a great weekend." Before I could even articulate a response, he tapped his knuckles on the particle board of my desk and walked away. I sat there in the deafening quiet that follows a disaster, listening to the heavy glass doors of the lobby click shut behind him. My eyes burned as I clicked open the digital file. What Marcus confidently called a draft was, in reality, a digital graveyard of sheer incompetence. I scrolled through the pages, my stomach twisting into a tight knot. The soil surveys were tragically incomplete, missing critical data for the entire eastern quadrant of the site. The architectural sections were nothing but plagiarized fluff, clearly copied and pasted from outdated urban planning brochures with the formatting still horribly mismatched. And the budget projections? They were wildly inaccurate. He had slashed material costs by 30% without adjusting the labor hours, creating a financial fantasy that any amateur auditor would tear apart in 5 minutes. It was a catastrophic mess, and my name was going to be listed as the secondary author. I buried my face in my hands, the rough fabric of my sleeves pressing against my tired eyes. I was mentally calculating how many hours of sleep I could physically skip before my heart gave out, when I heard the unmistakable, pathetic squeak of a chair rolling across the thin office carpet. I looked up. It was Julian. Julian was our 22-year-old summer intern. He was a quiet, scruffy kid who practically lived in a faded university hoodie and a pair of worn-out sneakers. The senior partners treated him like a piece of broken office equipment, only acknowledging him when the printer jammed or they needed a fresh pot of coffee. He awkwardly rolled his chair right up to the threshold of my cubicle, gripping a paper cup of lukewarm water. He looked at my monitors, then looked at my face, which was probably pale and devoid of all hope. "Hey," Julian muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. I saw Marcus leave with his golf clubs, and I saw the file size of the folder he just dropped onto the shared network. It looks really bad. Do you want me to pull the municipal zoning records for the Seattle site? I have back-end access to the city's historical database. I stared at him in disbelief. It was Friday night. A 22-year-old college kid should be out making terrible decisions at a crowded bar, not volunteering to dig through decades of bureaucratic zoning paperwork. I assumed he would last maybe 1 hour before the mind-numbing tedium broke his spirit, and he suddenly remembered a phantom family emergency. But I was drowning in a sea of corporate negligence, and he was offering me a piece of driftwood. Out of sheer, unadulterated desperation, I let out a long, heavy sigh. "Bring your laptop over here, Julian," I said, pointing to the empty space on my desk. "We have 400 pages to verify, and it is going to be a very long night." The transition from dusk to deep night happened without either of us saying a single word. By 7 o'clock in the evening, the cleaning staff had emptied our wastebaskets and turned off the main corridor lights, plunging the 7th floor into a shadowy expanse illuminated only by the harsh blue glow of our dual monitors. We tore Marcus's massive, disorganized document apart, stripping it down to the studs. I braced myself for the grueling task of hand-holding a college kid through complex zoning algorithms, but Julian shattered my expectations within the first 30 minutes. The kid was a phantom. His fingers flew across his keyboard in a relentless, percussive rhythm, pulling up property deeds, environmental impact reports, and historical city planning documents faster than our outdated corporate server could properly render them. He did not complain. He did not check his phone. He just worked with a terrifying surgical efficiency. We fell into a strange, wordless cadence. I would highlight a section of Marcus's plagiarized architectural nonsense, delete it entirely, and call out a data point I needed to reconstruct the narrative. Before the sentence fully left my mouth, Julian would slide a freshly downloaded PDF into our shared cloud folder, perfectly formatted and highlighted. It was like watching a master watchmaker sort through thousands of scattered gears to find the exact piece required to make the whole machine tick. Around midnight, the rhythmic clacking of Julian's keyboard abruptly stopped. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with the kind of sudden tension that immediately raises the hairs on the back of your neck. I glanced over my shoulder. Julian was leaning in so close to his screen that his nose was nearly touching the glass, his eyes scanning a faded, digitized municipal survey map from the late 1990s. "Nora," he said, his voice completely devoid of its usual awkward hesitation, "you need to look at this, right now." I pushed my chair back and rolled over to his workstation. He pointed a steady finger at a dense cluster of topographical lines curving right underneath the eastern boundary of the proposed Vanguard site. Marcus's risk assessment had classified the soil composition as standard urban landfill, requiring only basic, low-cost concrete slab foundations to support the planned residential towers. I pulled the deep core geological surveys from the Municipal Water Authority, Julian explained, pulling up a secondary window filled with raw geological data. Marcus only looked at the top 20 feet of soil, But if you go down 80 feet, right here, there is a buried, dormant fault line. The soil above it is heavily saturated. If they build the eastern quadrant using the current shallow foundation blueprint, the vibrational stress from the nearby shipping port, combined with the natural settling of the earth, will trigger localized liquefaction. I stared at the screen, my blood turning to ice water in my veins. He was absolutely right. It was not just a minor oversight. It was a catastrophic failure of basic due diligence. If Apex Horizon builders followed Marcus's aggressively cheap construction plan, the structural integrity of the eastern towers would be totally compromised. They would not just lean, they would fracture and experience a catastrophic structural collapse in less than 10 years. It was a billion-dollar lawsuit waiting to happen, not to mention a devastating risk to human life. Marcus was so blinded by his desire to inflate the short-term profit margins that he was literally building a tomb. "Delete his entire structural plan," I ordered, my voice hardening. "Burn it to the ground. We are starting over." Panic is a useless emotion in commercial architecture. When the ground underneath you is unstable, you do not panic. You dig deeper. From midnight until 3 o'clock in the morning, the cubicle transformed into a war room. I ripped up the shallow foundation designs and began engineering a deep pile foundation strategy. We would have to drive massive steel and concrete pilings over 100 feet into the earth, anchoring the structures directly into the solid bedrock beneath the fault line. It was an incredibly expensive pivot, one that would eat a massive hole into Marcus's fantasy profit margins, but it was the only way to ensure the buildings remained standing for the next century. To offset the massive financial blow of the deep pile foundations, I needed to give the City Council a reason to approve a series of highly lucrative zoning variances. I pivoted to the public green space. Marcus had sketched out a pitiful, barren concrete plaza. I scrapped it completely and redesigned a lush, sustainable waterfront park, integrating advanced stormwater management systems and community amphitheaters. It was the kind of visionary, eco-friendly public offering that politicians love to brag about in press conferences. It would guarantee our permit approvals and provide massive long-term tax incentives. While I aggressively drafted the new blueprints and wrote the environmental justifications, Julian ran the complex structural cost simulations. He was processing millions of dollars in hypothetical construction materials, labor hours, and heavy machinery rentals, balancing the ledgers with an intensity that genuinely shocked me. Every time I adjusted the depth of a steel piling, he recalculated the budget matrix in real time. By 3:30 in the morning, the adrenaline finally began to wear off, leaving a hollow, echoing exhaustion in its wake. We ended up in the bleak, neon-lit break room, leaning against the cheap laminate counters. Julian handed me a paper cup filled with terrible, sludgy black coffee from the vending machine. I took a sip, grimacing at the burnt, acidic taste. "You saved the firm tonight, Julian," I said, staring at the dark liquid in my cup. If you had not caught that topographical anomaly, Marcus would have pitched a death trap to the investors on Monday. Julian took a slow sip of his own coffee, his dark eyes studying the blinking fluorescent light above us. "We saved it," he corrected quietly. "You built the solution, but he is going to take all the credit for it, is he not? When he gets back from Aspen, he is going to put his name on your foundation strategy." I let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Of course he is. That is how the machine works. We shovel the coal, and the guys in the custom-tailored suits get to blow the whistle." We stood there in the quiet hum of the empty building, sharing a profound, unspoken realization. We were separated by a decade of age and a massive gap in the corporate hierarchy. Yet we were exactly the same. We were the only two people in this entire glass tower who actually gave a damn about the physical reality of the work itself, rather than the empty prestige it provided. At exactly 4 o'clock in the morning, we walked back to my desk. We had successfully compressed Marcus's 400 pages of bloated, dangerous lies into a sleek, flawless, 120-page master document. It was practically a work of art, a perfect fusion of structural integrity and brilliant urban design. I attached the file to a new email, addressed it to Marcus, and firmly pressed the send key. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the sent confirmation box. I fully expected Marcus to steal every single word I had just written, but as I grabbed my coat to finally go home, a strange sense of peace washed over me. I had done my job. I had prevented a catastrophe. Whatever happened on Monday morning, the truth was firmly documented on the server, waiting in the dark. Monday morning arrived with the subtlety of a blunt force trauma. I dragged myself through the revolving glass doors of the Apex Horizon lobby at exactly 7 o'clock, my body vibrating with a toxic cocktail of adrenaline and severe sleep deprivation. My eyes felt like they were lined with crushed glass, and my tailored blazer hung awkwardly over my shoulders, hiding the fact that my hands were trembling slightly from too much caffeine. I had spent the entire weekend staring at the ceiling of my apartment, my brain endlessly running stress simulations of the deep pile foundation loads. I was utterly exhausted, but I was also fiercely proud. We had fixed the unfixable. Then, at 7:45, Marcus Vance made his grand entrance. He did not just walk into the office. He arrived like a conquering hero returning from battle. He strutted across the 7th-floor bullpen, radiating a sickening, unearned vitality. His skin boasted a fresh, high-altitude suntan from his weekend in Aspen, glowing against the crisp white collar of his bespoke midnight blue suit. He smelled of expensive sandalwood cologne and absolute terrifying shamelessness. He looked like a man who had slept a solid 8 hours every single night, completely unburdened by the crushing reality of the work he was actually supposed to be managing. He paused at my cubicle just long enough to adjust his platinum cufflinks. He did not ask how my weekend was. He did not acknowledge the timestamp on the email I had sent him at 4 o'clock on Saturday morning. "Good job cleaning up the formatting on that document, Nora," he said smoothly, his voice dripping with casual condescension. "It reads much better now. Grab the intern and head into the main boardroom. I want both of you to stand by the back wall and stay quiet during the pitch. Do not speak unless spoken to. Let the senior partners handle the heavy lifting today." Formatting. He called a complete structural overhaul and $1 billion disaster mitigation, cleaning up the formatting. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted copper, swallowing the sharp, bitter retort that clawed at my throat. I nodded silently, gathering my tablet, and walked down the long, carpeted hallway toward the executive boardroom. The room was a cavernous, intimidating space wrapped in floor-to-ceiling glass, designed specifically to make anyone sitting at the massive mahogany table feel incredibly important. At each leather executive chair, a pristine, spiral-bound copy of the master pitch deck waited, printed on heavyweight, glossy cardstock. We had exactly 10 minutes before the investors arrived. I walked over to the nearest chair to double-check the printed appendices. As soon as my fingers brushed the edge of the binder, a cold, sickening sensation settled deep in the pit of my stomach. The physical weight of the document felt entirely wrong. It was far too thin. My heart hammered frantically against my ribs as I quickly flipped open the heavy cover. I bypassed the flashy architectural renderings and turned straight to the structural engineering index. Nothing. I flipped the pages faster, the glossy paper slicing against my fingertips. Section 4. The entire 30-page comprehensive soil mitigation strategy that Julian and I had bled over was completely gone, vanished. In its place was Marcus's original plagiarized garbage. He had actually reverted the foundation blueprints back to the cheap, shallow concrete slabs. He had kept my beautiful, sustainable park design to win over the city council, but he had entirely stripped out the engineering required to keep the surrounding skyscrapers standing upright. My breath caught in my throat. I frantically flipped to the financial summary at the back of the deck. The numbers practically leaped off the page, mocking me. The projected construction costs were slashed to the bone, while the projected profit margins were artificially inflated to astronomical heights. Suddenly, the horrific mathematics of his betrayal clicked into perfect, terrifying focus. Implementing my deep pile foundation strategy would have guaranteed the safety of the buildings, but it would have reduced the short-term profit margins of the project by exactly 12%. 12% was not enough to kill the deal, but it was the exact mathematical threshold Marcus needed to cross to trigger his own massive seven-figure quarterly executive bonus. He did not care about the longevity of the Vanguard project. He did not care that the eastern quadrant was situated directly over a dormant geological fault line. He only cared about presenting aggressively lucrative numbers today to secure his personal payout. A dark, suffocating wave of realization crashed over me. Marcus was no longer just a lazy, credit-stealing middle manager. By intentionally deleting verified geological risks and presenting fabricated structural costs to a primary financial backer, he was actively committing severe corporate fraud. He was willing to endanger the lives of thousands of future residents just to buy a third vacation home. If this development went up on those shallow foundations, the towers would fracture. People would lose absolutely everything. The air in the boardroom suddenly felt too thick to breathe. I looked up, my hands gripping the edge of the mahogany table so tightly my knuckles turned white. Across the room, standing completely still near the marble credenza, was Julian. He was wearing the same faded university hoodie from Friday night, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. I caught his eye. I expected to see the panicked, deer-in-the-headlights look of a college kid realizing he was suddenly an accessory to a federal crime. But that is not what I saw at all. Julian was staring dead ahead at Marcus, who was busy adjusting the projector screen at the front of the room. The young intern's face was completely devoid of fear. Instead, his jaw was clenched tight, and his dark eyes were locked onto my boss with an expression of cold, absolute, calculating disgust. It was the look of a predator watching a very stupid prey walk blindly into a fatal snare. Before I could even process the chilling intensity radiating from the kid in the hoodie, the heavy wooden doors of the boardroom swung violently open. A procession of navy suits, designer briefcases, and aggressively polished Italian leather shoes filed into the room. The senior partners of Apex Horizon took their seats along the flanks of the massive table, projecting an aura of manufactured confidence that barely concealed their underlying desperation. They needed this capital. But all that corporate posturing evaporated the second Elias Sterling crossed the threshold. Sterling was the billionaire titan underwriting the entire Seattle waterfront initiative. He did not walk so much as he simply occupied space, bringing a suffocating gravitational weight into the room with him. He wore a charcoal suit that lacked any flashy designer labels, yet radiated a quiet, dangerous wealth that made everyone else look incredibly cheap. His face was weathered, carved from decades of ruthless boardroom executions, and his eyes possessed the flat, unreadable quality of slate. The ambient chatter died instantly. The nervous shuffling of paper ceased. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet 10 degrees the moment he pulled out his chair and sat down at the far end of the table. Marcus took his position at the head of the room, wielding a silver presentation clicker like a conductor's baton. He launched into the pitch with a sickeningly smooth cadence, his voice perfectly modulated for maximum persuasion. He was a master of corporate theater, projecting from his diaphragm, making calculated, lingering eye contact with every minor investor in the room. I stood rooted by the heavy oak doors, wedged into a shadowy corner. My arms were crossed tightly over my chest, my fingernails digging painfully into the fabric of my sleeves. I chewed violently on the inside of my cheek as the projector transitioned to a massive, high-definition rendering of the sustainable waterfront park, my park. The complex stormwater management systems, the tiered community amphitheaters, the lush green canopy designed to offset the urban heat island effect, all of it was displayed in stunning, vibrant detail. I had somewhat of a midnight epiphany this weekend, Marcus lied smoothly, pressing a hand over his heart in a sickening display of false humility. I realized that to truly anchor this development, we needed to give the city a lasting legacy. This eco-park is my personal vision for the future of urban living, designed entirely from scratch during my retreat. I tasted copper in my mouth. My jaw ached from clenching it so hard. He was selling my exhausted, desperate, 3 in the morning engineering miracle for polite applause. Worse, he was using my beautiful green space as a shiny distraction to bury the ticking time bomb he had reinstated beneath the soil. It took every ounce of my professional self-control not to scream across the room and tear the clicker out of his manicured hands. Yet, despite the flawless delivery, the performance was fundamentally failing on its most important audience member. Elias Sterling was utterly immune to the charm offensive. He did not nod. He did not smile. He did not even bother to look at the vibrant renderings glowing on the projection screen. Instead, his sharp, predatory gaze kept drifting past the eager Apex executives, past Marcus's grand hand gestures, and straight toward the back wall. I subtly followed his line of sight. He was staring directly at Julian. The intern was leaning casually against the frosted glass partition, completely ignoring the unspoken rule that junior staff should blend invisibly into the wallpaper. Julian still wore that faded university hoodie, holding a small, battered leather notebook open in one hand. He was calmly scratching down notes with a cheap ballpoint pen. Every time Marcus delivered a particularly egregious lie about the structural integrity of the project, Julian's pen would pause. The young man would slowly lift his head, his dark eyes flicking up to meet Sterling's icy stare across the expanse of the room. It was a silent, terrifying exchange of information happening right over the heads of the most powerful men in the firm. A quiet assessment of guilt. Oblivious to the silent current of tension pulling across the room, Marcus confidently clicked to the final section of the deck, moving to the financial projections. A massive bar chart appeared, showing profit margins soaring well past the initial estimates, displaying figures that were mathematically impossible without compromising human safety. The Apex partners practically salivated at the numbers on the screen. As you can see, gentlemen, we are not just building a landmark, we are building an absolute fortress of profitability, Marcus boasted, his voice rising in triumph, completely drunk on his own fabricated success. By restructuring the subterranean blueprints and streamlining unnecessary structural redundancies, I have successfully reduced our baseline construction costs, driving our projected yields up by a staggering margin. He was calling the removal of life-saving deep-pile foundation anchors a streamlined redundancy. He was packaging a future catastrophe, a literal collapse waiting to happen, as a brilliant financial victory. Marcus paused, spreading his arms wide, waiting for the inevitable chorus of approval and the rustle of checkbooks. Instead, a profound, heavy vacuum swallowed the room. Nobody moved. The silence was absolute and suffocating. Slowly, deliberately, Elias Sterling leaned forward in his heavy leather chair. He picked up a solid silver pen from the table and brought the metal tip down against the polished mahogany wood. A single sharp tap echoed through the boardroom like the unmistakable crack of a gunshot. The air instantly turned to ice. My lungs seized. The charade was over. Elias Sterling slowly pushed his heavy leather chair back and stood up to his full height. The sheer physical presence of the billionaire seemed to crush whatever oxygen remained in the room. He did not look angry. He looked profoundly bored, which was somehow infinitely more terrifying than if he had started shouting. He let his slate-gray eyes drag over Marcus's trembling, pathetic form with unadulterated disdain. "I do not make a habit of ignoring my son's recommendations," Sterling stated, his voice a low, lethal rumble that vibrated against the glass walls. A collective gasp ripped through the executives, seated at the massive mahogany table. I turned my head, my mind struggling to process the impossible words that had just left the billionaire's mouth. At the back of the room, Julian reached up and calmly unclipped the cheap plastic Apex Horizon Intern lanyard from around his neck. He tossed it onto the marble credenza, where it landed with a sharp, dismissive clatter that echoed loudly in the stunned silence. He was not just a scruffy 22-year-old college kid working for minimum wage. He was Julian Sterling. He was the heir to the entire Sterling financial empire, placed inside our firm completely incognito to audit the ethical foundation of their potential business partners. Julian stepped forward, bridging the distance between the shadows and the executive table. He did not raise his voice, but the entire room hung on his every syllable as if their lives depended on it. When Nora sent you the revised, structurally sound engineering report at exactly 4 o'clock on Saturday morning, Marcus, I was sitting right next to her. And the second you received it, I forwarded a carbon copy directly to my father's private server. We have known since Saturday that the deep pile foundation strategy was the only viable path forward to prevent a disaster. We sat here and gave you exactly 30 minutes to present the truth. Instead, you intentionally presented a fabricated structural budget, knowingly committing financial fraud in a room full of witnesses. Marcus's jaw slackened completely. The remaining blood drained from his face, leaving him a ghastly shade of gray. He tried to speak, but only a dry, pathetic wheeze escaped his throat. He looked at his own board of directors for salvation, but the senior partners were physically shrinking away from him in their expensive leather chairs, their faces twisted in absolute horror. He had become radioactive. Elias Sterling turned his attention to the head of the Apex board. I am formally withdrawing my capital from Marcus Vance's management. My legal team is already drafting the paperwork for gross negligence. I will only proceed with the Vanguard project if the entire development contract is completely restructured by 5 o'clock this evening, and that man is removed from the premises immediately. The head of the board, a man who had spent the last 5 years heavily championing Marcus's meteoric rise through the corporate ranks, did not hesitate for a single second. He pointed a trembling finger toward the heavy oak doors. Get out of this building, Marcus. Now. Security will escort you to your desk to collect your personal belongings. 2 burly vice presidents, desperate to distance themselves from the blast radius, practically dragged Marcus out of the boardroom. He did not fight back. His shoulders were slumped, his designer suit suddenly looking 3 sizes too big. His career was entirely destroyed, and he was walking straight into a blizzard of federal lawsuits that would bankrupt him. The heavy doors clicked shut behind him, sealing his permanent downfall. Sterling turned his imposing gaze back to me. The coldness in his eyes had retreated, replaced by a sharp, assessing respect. Nora Parker, Sterling said, testing the weight of my name. You possess a rare combination of structural genius and moral spine. Apex Horizon clearly does not know what to do with you, but I do. Effective immediately, you are the lead project director for the Vanguard development. You have total control over the architectural budget, and you report directly to my firm. Do not let these suits compromise your vision. I will not let you down, Mr. Sterling, I replied, my voice remarkably steady despite the shockwaves reverberating through my entire body. The billionaire gave a single curt nod, then turned and swept out of the room, followed immediately by his son and the frantic, scrambling herd of Apex executives who were desperate to salvage their dying company. Within seconds, the cavernous boardroom was completely empty, save for me and Julian. He lingered by the doorway for a brief moment. He looked at me, pushing his hands deep into the pockets of his faded university hoodie. A small, genuine smile touched the corners of his mouth. He offered me a quiet, victorious nod. I returned it. The invisible workers had finally inherited the empire we built. Thank you so very much for listening to today's story. We always love reading your comments, so please let us know where in the world you are listening from right now. If you found today's narrative entertaining and want to support our team, please consider joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon. It is over there that we upload our absolute best, highly exclusive true stories, fully narrated by a talented cast of emotional actors that we simply cannot make public on YouTube. You can scan the QR code currently displayed on your screen, or click the Patreon link down in the description or the pinned comment to join us. Thank you again for your time, and we will see you in the next one.